Are sensitivity readers necessary? I think that this is a very important question to ask because sensitivity readers seem to have become more of a growing trend in publishing, both in traditional publishing and self-publishing. And I was not aware that this was even a thing up until very recently when I joined authortube. I've never in my life heard of sensitivity readers before. I've never used them for my books, nor do I ever plan to. And I've not really seen many videos or much discussion online talking about the potential, I guess, just, critiquing the concept of sensitivity readers. People seem to be more for it. And I want to sort of produce a counter viewpoint to something which I see as being a potentially problematic. And I'm going to explain why. So for those who don't know, sensitivity readers are a kind of editor who are hired by an author to essentially read through their manuscript and to check that a character of a certain marginalized identity has not been portrayed in a way that is, I guess, offensive, that is not maybe harmful or culturally biased or cliched or stereotyped. So an example would be if an author who is not trans, like say myself, has written a character who is trans in their manuscript, they would then hire a transgender sensitivity reader to make sure that the transgender character is being portrayed in a way that is true and fair and accurate, and also if they need to bring out more of the representation of that character. So the three main problems that I can see with sensitivity readers: number one, I believe that it places emphasis on superficial aspects of the character, i.e. their race, their gender, their sexuality. And I know that's the whole crux of identity politics. It's very much about enforcing these things about a person which are really not the sum of a person. When we talk about somebody's character, for example, what is my character? My character is not, I am a black female, I'm a black heterosexual female. My character is, I am talkative and curious and creative and blunt and slightly neurotic at times and witty and slightly overdramatic. Those are the things which make up me. And the same goes for any character in a story. My self-published 2019 coming-of-age novel, Anne, features a character, the titular character, who is a lesbian. And I have characters of different sexualities in that book. There's a gay character, there's a bisexual character, and there's characters of different ethnicities. I didn't make that the sum of the book or the sum of any of their characters. And I know that Anne's friend, for example, who's bisexual, like, it's mentioned in passing and she touches on it, but it's not something which is made a huge deal out of, because at the end of the day, and even Anne herself, when I think of Anne, I don't think of a lesbian. I think of a very introspective, intelligent, mature young girl who is struggling in an incredibly toxic situation. She grows up in a household where her father is physically violent towards her mother. Her being a lesbian is such a small part of her character, and it's not, the story is not an LGBT coming out story. That's not the story that I wanted to write. The story is, here's a girl in a hard situation and she happens to be attracted to other girls. And I find it very concerning that people who are big proponents of identity politics want to take the rather superficial aspects of people and make them a huge thing, because we don't choose what color we are, we don't choose what gender we are, we don't choose what sexuality we are. People don't choose to be trans. You're trans from birth, obviously. Anyone who understands the science behind it understands that. Same with being straight or being gay. These things, at the end of the day, these things really shouldn't matter. And I think that identity politics and reinforcing these things pushes us more towards being so consumed by these things that we miss the point that this is a human being. So number two, the idea of sensitivity readers does lead to potential censorship of literature, which I find extremely concerning. And an example which I would think of is, for example, let's say if an author who is white has written a story with a black character and not given much thought to the fact that they're black, they just happen to be black, but now suddenly their sensitivity reader has said, no, you have to do this and this and this. And there is that element of censorship, of, I guess, being too concerned with being politically correct and offending people rather than writing well fleshed out, honest stories that feature different types of people. The purpose of literature is to entertain people and to make people think. And honestly, unless a character being white or black is a huge part of their story, like for example, the guy at Uncle Tom's Cabin obviously needs to be black, the Uncle Tom character, because otherwise the story wouldn't make much sense. Or Gone with the Wind, Scarlett O'Hara being a black woman wouldn't make sense within the context of the story, unless the character's race or gender, etc., makes sense in the context of the story. It really shouldn't matter. Like Hermione Granger from Harry Potter, Hermione being black or Chinese doesn't have any bearing on the story whatsoever. So yeah, we should be able to take a character and change these things, and it shouldn't really matter, because that's not the point. The point is, who is that person? What do we see inside? And I mentioned this in my video, Why Wokeness is Killing Art. What offends one person won't offend another person. What I am sensitive to won't offend, what I find, what I might be sensitive to, somebody else might not be sensitive to. And that's also why when we think of things like trigger warnings, I do think that trigger warnings seem to have become something which are rather overused. And again, we should have really universal ideas, like what really warrants a trigger warning or a content warning. Things like rape, graphic violence, maybe severe drug abuse. These are the things which classically warrant a trigger warning. And things like homophobia or casual sexism, these things are subjective, because when we say we call people out on sexism or racism or homophobia, these things are not necessarily objective, because again, what offends someone won't offend someone else. But I think we can all agree on what is a graphic rape scene or an example of graphic violence, etc. And number 3, which is probably one of the biggest problems with sensitivity readers, just because somebody shares a so-called marginalized identity with somebody doesn't mean they speak for every single person of that identity. And what's really interesting and a bit of a catch-22 is that sensitivity readers do actually say that they don't speak for every single person with that identity, which obviously makes you think, well, what is the point then? Why are you, if you're saying that you don't, you know what I mean? Like, there are how many black people there in the world? Like 4, 5 billion. One person who is a sensitivity reader and sensitivity reads a manuscript with a black character, they say, well, yes, I am black, so I can read this, but also I don't speak for every black person. It's rather absurd. So I do think that when someone is writing a story, they should do their research. And if you have a book with a character who has a terminal illness or is disabled, then yes, writers have always done research, spoken to professionals, to doctors, to people who might have that. But this whole thing of vetting a manuscript for whether or not something might all be offensive or not, I really don't agree with this. And, feel free to disagree with me on this. I know this is probably a rather controversial opinion, and believe me, I have done so many takes of this video. I have really tried to be as calm and diplomatic as possible, but I think it's an important video to make because I really do feel like I have to speak up for the people like me who don't want to use sensitivity readers, who don't like the idea of sensitivity readers, or who just can't afford sensitivity readers. Because think about it. Being a self-published author is already very expensive, paying for things like proofreading, editing, cover design, marketing, advertising, paying all for that, and then on top of all that, feeling some kind of external pressure to have your book vetted just because you have a character who is gay, and if you've written the character as a human being and not even given much thought to their sexuality, they just happen to be a man who likes other men. Yeah, so, yeah, I do think that we do go down a rather slippery slope into things like potential censorship and the idea of where could this potentially end up. Will we end up with a future of publishing where authors literally have to have their books vetted, whereby if a white author has written a story with a black man who is a serial killer, is their book going to be somehow called out for portraying a black person as being very aggressive and very violent? Like, there are so many potential problems with this. So, and I also really, really want to stress that if you're an author and you use a sensitivity reader, there are authors I respect who use sensitivity readers. Like, that is nothing, that is up to you. Like, I don't think it is anyone's place to tell people what to do. I do think, however, that whether someone chooses to use a sensitivity reader or not, it should be a personal choice and not something which is pushed onto authors, which it very might end up being. It isn't at the moment, but it could be. And I don't want to see that world. I don't want to see a world of publishing whereby an author who wants to publish a book has to have their book checked for has this been written offensively, because that is incredibly dangerous. I mean, if you don't think that's dangerous, then maybe read Fahrenheit 451, you know, and I know maybe I sound like I'm being dramatic, but look, we have to be really cautious because this world of outrage culture and PC culture and cancel culture and woke culture, it's all, like, on the one hand, it all seems rather hilarious, but we do really have to think, like, censorship of art has happened so many times throughout human history, and I don't want to see that happening in the future. And this is essentially why I've been working on this novel tic-tac-toe, which I'm going to be talking about in a video in December. It's all coming from a place of, I guess you could say, fear and alarm. Yeah. So, yeah, it's this 10-minute song. Don't want to talk for much longer, but please do let me know your thoughts on this. If you use a sensitivity reader, then let me know why you use one. If you don't want to use them, then let me know why. If you're on the fence about why to use them, then please let me know. But take it from my perspective, I don't think that any authors should use them if they don't want to, and I think if an author does want to use them, go for it, but also think about maybe why you're using them, and think about whether or not you really genuinely feel like it's necessary for your manuscript.